You are listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast on the forces shaping the global uranium fuel market, sponsored by Purepoint Uranium Group. Uranium Spotlight isn't just a podcast, it's a platform. Visit purepoint.ca to access in-depth market briefings, sector analysis, and the inaugural Behind the Curve report, understanding when and how the uranium market turns. If uranium matters to you, you're in the right place. And now, your host, Chris Frostad.
It's May 19, 2026, and this week on Uranium Spotlight, Washington moves to fast-track nuclear expansion. Russia and China tighten their grip on global uranium supply, and Global Atomic joins ISO Energy in adding new financial flexibility through an at-the-market financing program. The uranium spot price closed last week at $86.05 a pound, U3O8, after opening the week at $85.85. Trading activity remained steady throughout the week, with 15 spot transactions completed involving just over 1 million pounds of U3O8. Most of the activity centered around smaller 50,000-pound lots, highlighting that liquidity in the market remains thin and fragmented. Prices moved higher early in the week as buyers targeted Orano delivery locations, briefly pushing the blended spot price to $86.30 a pound before softer bids later in the week pulled prices back. By Monday morning this week, additional selling pressure pushed the spot indicator down again to $85.10 a pound. Despite the softer spot pricing, the term market remains active. Utilities continue evaluating multi-year uranium supply contracts extending well into the next decade. One non-U.S. utility is currently seeking roughly 500,000 pounds annually from 2027 through 2031, while another utility continues discussions for supply beginning in 2029. At the same time, the broader nuclear industry continues shifting from planning to execution. The Reuters SMR and Advanced Reactor Conference in Austin drew more than 800 industry participants last week, with the dominant message being that the nuclear sector must now move beyond announcements and begin actual construction. Major technology firms such as Amazon and Meta discussed direct involvement in nuclear power projects to support AI-driven electricity demand growth, while reactor developers and utilities emphasize the need for long-term fuel supply security. For investors, the key takeaway is that while short-term spot pricing remains volatile, the long-term contracting cycle continues to deepen as utilities, hyperscalers, and governments move from discussion to procurement. The uranium market is increasingly being shaped by future supply availability rather than today's headline spot price. The U.S. administration introduced a major new spending initiative last week aimed at dramatically expanding domestic nuclear power production over the coming decades. Central to the plan is a massive increase in financing support for reactor construction and nuclear supply chain infrastructure. The administration has now authorized the Office of Energy Dominance Financing, formerly known as the Loan Programs Office, to direct hundreds of billions of dollars towards the nuclear industry. According to industry officials, 5 or 6 different utilities are already in advanced stages of securing financing for new nuclear projects. One of the key objectives is speeding up construction timelines by financing long lead reactor components years before plants are completed. Large reactor vessels, steam generators, and other critical parts can often take years to manufacture and deliver, creating major bottlenecks for utilities attempting to build new reactors. Maria Korsnick, President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, stated that the plan is specifically intended to help utilities deploying Westinghouse AP1000 reactors. The AP1000 remains one of the most advanced and proven large-scale reactor designs currently available and is co-owned by Brookfield and Cameco. Each AP1000 reactor generates roughly 1 gigawatt of electricity. The scale of the administration's ambition, however, is enormous. The stated target is 400 gigawatts of nuclear power generation by 2050. That would imply the equivalent of roughly 400 AP1000-sized reactors entering operation over the next 25 years. The challenge, of course, is fuel supply. While reactor financing and construction timelines are difficult enough, fueling that many reactors would require a massive increase in uranium production, conversion capacity, enrichment, and fuel fabrication infrastructure. Uranium mine development alone often takes 15 years or more from discovery to full-scale production. At the same time, the global uranium market is already moving towards structural undersupply. Much of the existing uranium inventory held by utilities was accumulated during periods of oversupply following Fukushima. Those inventories continue to be drawn down while global reactor demand steadily expands. Even more importantly, uranium supply itself is becoming increasingly segmented by geopolitics, sanctions, and origin restrictions. Utilities are no longer buying from a single fungible global pool of uranium. They're competing for increasingly limited supplies from politically acceptable jurisdictions. Several of the most important recent market signals continue to reinforce this tightening trend. Producer guidance cuts last year confirmed that major suppliers cannot easily increase output. Utilities have extended contract tenors out to 7 to 10 years. Hyperscaler technology firms are now directly securing nuclear power supply agreements, and utilities are increasingly demanding strict origin assurances for fuel deliveries. The U.S. government's aggressive financing push now adds another layer to that equation. If even a fraction of the proposed reactor fleet moves forward, future uranium demand growth would become far larger than current market expectations. For investors, this matters because nuclear demand is no longer theoretical. Governments, utilities, and private industry are now actively financing and securing future reactor supply. The question increasingly shifts from whether reactors will be built to whether enough uranium can be delivered to fuel them. While Western nations race to secure future nuclear fuel supplies, Russia and China continue expanding their influence over some of the world's most important uranium-producing regions. One example receiving attention last week involves a Russian-backed uranium project in Namibia, near the borders of South Africa and Botswana. Some local concerns have emerged regarding water use and environmental impacts because the project uses in-situ leach mining, or ISR mining, within a shared aquifer system. In reality, ISR mining has been used safely around the world for decades and remains one of the most environmentally efficient forms of uranium extraction. The broader issue, however, is not the mining method itself, it's who ultimately controls the uranium production. Namibia is rapidly becoming one of the most strategically important uranium-producing nations in the world, yet increasing portions of its production are now either controlled by China or tied to Russian-aligned interests. Chinese state-owned companies already hold major positions across Namibia's uranium sector. China National Nuclear Corporation owns the Rosing uranium mine, while the massive Husab uranium mine is also Chinese-controlled. China National Nuclear Uranium Corporation additionally owns a significant portion in Paladin Energy's Langer Heinrich mine. At the same time, Russia's influence over African uranium production has expanded dramatically in recent years. Following the 2023 coup in Niger, the country's new Russian-aligned government gradually pushed French uranium producer Orano out of its operations before eventually seizing the Somer and Umuran uranium assets. Kazakhstan presents another example. Following major civil unrest in 2022, Russian peacekeepers helped stabilize the country. Since then, Kazakhstan has increasingly committed portions of its future uranium production towards Russian and Chinese interests through long-term contracts. The result is a uranium market becoming increasingly bifurcated. Western utilities now face growing restrictions on where they can source acceptable uranium supply. Even if global uranium production rises, much of that future production may never become accessible to Western markets. At the same time, demand growth continues accelerating across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. Utilities seeking long-term fuel supply increasingly compete for a shrinking pool of politically acceptable material. For investors, this matters because uranium is no longer simply a commodity story. It's rapidly becoming a geopolitical security issue. Supply availability is now being shaped not only by mine output, but by alliances, sanctions, ownership structures, and national energy policy. That makes future supply shortages far more difficult to solve than most headline production forecasts currently suggest. Global Atomic announced last week that it has reestablished its at-the-market equity program, allowing the company to issue up to $50 million Canadian in common shares through the market over the next 2 years. The company stated that proceeds from the ATM program would primarily support continued development of its Dasa uranium project in Niger alongside general corporate purposes. Importantly, Global Atomic emphasized that the ATM is only one component of a much broader financing strategy. The company continues discussions regarding potential debt financing through a U.S. development bank, while also evaluating strategic partnership opportunities and other non-equity funding options for Dasa. The Dasa project remains one of the world's most advanced undeveloped uranium projects. Underground development continues progressing, with commissioning currently targeted for late 2027 and first yellowcake shipments expected during the first half of 2028. What made this announcement particularly interesting is that it follows a similar ATM program announced recently by ISO Energy. IsoEnergy also established a new $50 million ATM facility, but emphasized that it already maintains a very strong balance sheet, including more than $135 million Canadian in cash and a substantial portfolio of equity holdings. In both cases, the ATM structures are less about immediate survival financing and more about optionality and flexibility. These programs allow companies to opportunistically raise capital into the market strength without undertaking large, highly discounted financings. For investors, the key takeaway is this. Uranium developers are preparing for a capital-intensive growth phase as the market moves closer towards large-scale mine construction and production growth. Access to flexible financing tools becomes increasingly valuable as companies position themselves for what many believe will be a much tighter uranium supply environment ahead.
You've been listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast dedicated to the latest developments shaping the uranium fuel market and its role in the global energy landscape, sponsored by Purepoint Uranium Group. While our passion for the sector is undeniable, nothing discussed here should be considered investment advice. Our mission is to provide a clear, balanced view of the forces influencing uranium prices and the nuclear fuel cycle. For deeper analysis and market briefings, visit purepoint.ca. Join us again next Tuesday for another edition of Uranium Spotlight.